They thought the cameras had stopped rolling. They thought the mic was off. But what it captured would echo far beyond the walls of that studio. In a space built for control, silence became the sharpest voice. She walked in alone. No staff, no entourage, no press. Just a plain folder, a small matte black USB drive, and a calm that unnerved everyone watching from behind glass. They had invited her to lose. They had rehearsed her defeat. But she came with something they hadn't prepared for: truth. Her name was Jasmine Crockett, a congresswoman, a lawyer, a woman used to being underestimated. But not today. Today, she wasn't there for a debate. She was there to document the collapse of an illusion. And when she would eventually slide that USB across the host's polished desk, it wouldn't just change the segment. It would change the narrative. Days earlier, a white envelope appeared on her office desk. No seal, no logo, no courier signature. It hadn't come through the front desk. It just appeared. Jasmine had stared at it longer than necessary. Something about it was too clean, too calculated. She opened it with a steel letter opener she kept not for letters but for boundaries. Inside, a single sheet of formal cream paper. An invitation to appear on a special, unfiltered edition of Justice with Judge Jeanine. The topic: race, rhetoric, and responsibility. No producer's name, no callback number. Just a date, a time, and that word, unfiltered, bolded like a dare. Jasmine's assistant Malik hovered at the door, unsettled. It didn't come through any normal channels, he said quietly. This is off. Jasmine knew it. Of course she knew. But she also knew what this was. A trap, a stage, an ambush dressed in civility. They want to provoke you, Malik added, reading the concern on her face. They want you to look unhinged. She folded the letter as carefully as she filed a court brief. Tell them I'll be there, she said. The car arrived at the studio just after sunset. The city lights glared dimly as dusk bled into concrete. She stepped out slowly, not like a guest arriving, but like a witness entering evidence into the record. Her black tailored suit held no jewelry, her face minimal but intentional. Just enough liner to say, I see you. I don't blink. In one hand, a manila folder. In her blazer, a USB the size of her thumb but heavy with intent. She didn't bring talking points. She brought proof. Security offered to escort her. She declined. A producer cracked the hallway door, whispered into a headset, she's here. She's alone. It was the aloneness that disturbed them. Alone meant she wasn't there to play by their rules. Alone meant she'd written her own. Inside the green room, everything felt artificial. The scent of burned coffee. The flicker of LED lights. The hollow air of a space that had been sanitized of accountability. There were cue cards laid out on the table, none with her name on them. A production assistant gave her the rundown with a strained smile. You'll be seated on stage left. Judge Jeanine opens. Then you'll be allowed a rebuttal. Jasmine raised her hand, gently. I'm not here for choreography, she said, voice steady. I'm here for truth. The assistant nodded and quickly retreated. Jasmine sat down, alone, on the stiff green room couch. From her folder, she pulled a photo. Faded, folded at the edges, soft with memory. It was her and her mother, standing on the courthouse steps the day she passed the bar exam. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, a whisper through time. If you ever have to choose between being palatable and being principled, choose the one that lets you sleep at night. She tucked the photo away, stood, and adjusted her cuffs. No mirror check, no last glance, just breath. The stage manager's voice echoed from down the hall. We're live in 5. She didn't hurry. She walked with the poise of someone who understood the game and had no intention of playing it by their rules. The hallway to the stage felt more like a tunnel. It didn't end in light. It ended in performance. She heard laughter, rehearsed. Applause, timed. Ding sounds, cued. Not genuine, just controlled. A warm-up host instructed the audience like an orchestra. When you hear this cue, he pressed a button. A bell rang, clap, react, smile. We're live. Make it feel alive. Jasmine, still behind the curtain, said nothing. But she saw everything. The air was cold, not from air conditioning, but from calculation. The lighting wasn't ambient, it was surgical. The furniture wasn't furnishing, it was strategy. Behind the host's desk, the camera angles had been measured. The chairs weren't equal. Her podium sat slightly lower. Her chair faced the wrong camera. The framing wasn't subtle. It was designed. The graphics on the wall didn't ask a question. They made an accusation. Race. Rhetoric. Responsibility. Who's tearing America apart? This wasn't an interview. This wasn't a discussion. This was a trap built on production values. Jasmine had studied that, filed it away. Like a courtroom motion, it was all part of discovery. She was handed a mic. A technician offered last-minute makeup. She declined. Her voice needed no gloss. Her truth needed no enhancement. Backstage monitors played Jeanine Pirro's pre-roll. Sirens, crowds, shouting pundits. Over it, Jeanine's voice. We ask the hard questions, because too many are afraid of the answers. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, not surprised, confirmed. The ambush wasn't hidden. It was glorified. 4 minutes, a stagehand called out. Jasmine breathed, her folder under her arm. Her USB nestled inside her blazer. Her feet planted, her expression unchanged. She whispered a line her mother once told her on a stormy night. A still woman in a storm isn't weak. She's waiting for the lightning to hit where it's meant to. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't angry. She was ready. And behind the curtain, as the lights began to burn hot and the applause sign lit red, the stage wasn't just set. It was exposed. Jasmine Crockett had already begun building her case. The music hit first, bold and overproduced, surging through the studio with artificial urgency. Then came the camera sweep, a wide, deliberate pan across the audience, capturing their smiling, trained faces like a court sketch before the trial begins. It lingered, then landed squarely on the desk. Jeanine Pirro sat poised behind it like a queen before a coronation. Her smile was crisp, camera-ready, weaponized. "Good evening, America," she began, every syllable clipped and polished, rehearsed to precision. "Tonight, we are joined by someone who's made quite a name for herself. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett." The audience clapped on cue. Not too long, not too short. Controlled, engineered. Jeanine continued, tapping her fingers lightly against the desk, a practiced beat of command. "But before we begin our unfiltered dialogue, let's take a look at the kind of leadership Congresswoman Crockett believes in." She nodded. A cue, a trap sprung. The screen behind them exploded into color. Red and white, then black, then footage, muted first, then Jasmine's voice filled the room. Mid-sentence, mid-motion, angry. That's how they framed her. A clip from a congressional hearing. Jasmine raising her voice, slamming a binder, speaking hard truths. "This system is broken and we are done pretending it serves us." Cut. Another moment. Her hand slicing the air. "You want peace? Then stop brutalizing our communities." Cut again. A freeze frame. Jasmine's mouth open, mid-word. Her eyes wide, her hand raised. The still made her look unhinged. To those watching at home, it was rage without reason. Fire without focus. The image of a woman coming apart. Then silence. The screen dimmed. The room paused. Jeanine turned back to camera, her voice now dipped in honey. "Ladies and gentlemen, is that justice, or just another performance meant to go viral?" Scattered laughter, just enough to feel engineered. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't blink. She didn't tilt her head. She didn't react. Her face held nothing but calm, not defensiveness, not even resistance. Just presence. The producers tensed. In the booth, a junior director whispered, "She's not reacting." "Should we pivot?" "Give it 30 seconds, the lead said. "If she cracks, we catch it. If not, we cut wide and reset." But Jasmine didn't crack. She sat in the silence and let it stretch, let it breathe, let it reveal itself for what it was. Not power, but pretense. The footage wasn't fake. That was the brilliance of the trap. It was real, just deformed. Cut mid-sentence, framed for fury, stripped of context. A weapon, not a window. Jasmine had lived inside those frames her whole life. She knew how they were built. And she knew how to outlast them. Jeanine tried again. "Congresswoman, let's start simple," she said, her tone shifting, narrowing like a predator circling. "Is that your definition of justice? Raising your voice on the House floor? Accusing entire departments of corruption on national television?" Still no answer. Jasmine's eyes didn't waver. Her posture didn't shift. She simply looked at Jeanine, not with judgment, not with defiance, with something deeper: clarity. The kind that unsettles not because it's loud, but because it sees. Jeanine adjusted her papers. Her smile faltered by a fraction. It wasn't composure anymore. It was calculation with no place to land. In the control room, another whisper. "She's turning the silence into strength." Push to be cam. Close up. The camera obeyed. Zoomed in. Jasmine's face filled the screen. Not trembling. Not tense. Still. A monument of poise in a storm of provocation. Jeanine cleared her throat. "So no denial then?" she asked, too quickly. "You see your role as performance?" Jasmine finally moved. Just her hands. She folded them softly in her lap. A gesture so small, it cracked the frame they'd built. Then, she leaned forward. Not to dominate, to focus. Her voice, when it came, was low. Not soft, measured. The kind of tone witnesses remember years after. "I represent the truth," she said. "And it seems the truth makes certain former judges very uncomfortable." The air changed. No gasp. No applause. Just stillness. Jeanine blinked. Her fingers curled. Her cue cards suddenly looked less like prompts and more like shields. In the booth, a voice said, "She just flipped the table." Jeanine leaned back, reached for her rebuttal, but her voice carried a tremor now. She tried to mask it with elegance. "With respect, Congresswoman, I think the American people want less volume and more solutions. Not drama, not accusations, just policy." Jasmine didn't blink. She waited. And then, calmly, evenly, she replied. "And yet, your producers opened with footage designed for provocation. Mid-sentence, mid-emotion, cut and spliced like a trailer. If that's policy to you, then I'm not the one performing." The silence that followed wasn't dead air. It was transformation. In that pause, the audience leaned forward. Some unsure of what they were seeing. Others very sure. This wasn't a debate. This was a dismantling, not with rage, but with restraint. Jeanine smiled again, or tried to, but it no longer fit. "Well," she said tightly. "Let's let the audience decide." She gestured off stage. "Roll the next clip." The screen behind them flared. But Jasmine didn't turn. She didn't need to, because while they were preparing their next strike, Jasmine had already laid the groundwork for her own. She moved, not abruptly, not for show, with surgical intention. Her fingers reached into her blazer and drew out the matte black USB. She didn't hold it up. She didn't announce it. She placed it quietly on the table and slid it forward. A whisper of sound, smaller than a heartbeat, but louder than any argument. "You want to play clips?" she said, calm as ever. "Let's play mine." The studio froze. For a moment, no one moved. In the booth, chaos sparked. "What's on that USB?" someone hissed. She didn't submit anything. No legal review. No clearance. Jasmine didn't wait for permission. She turned to the assistant stage manager. "Play the file titled, Clip 1. No edits. Full volume." The producer hesitated. Jeanine began to speak, too late. Jasmine lifted her hand, not to silence her, but to claim the space. "This one's unedited," she said. "And unlike yours, it tells the whole story." The USB was plugged in. The screen lit up. No music. No graphics. Just grainy video. Dated August 17, 2020. Timestamp: 8:46 p.m. Same studio. Same desk. Jeanine Pirro, post-show, peeling off her mic, unaware the feed was still alive. She looked irritated. A voice off camera asked a question, inaudible. Jeanine's reply rang out clear, casual. I don't care about truth, as long as the ratings stay up. No drama, no guilt, no whisper. Just a truth said out loud by someone who didn't care who heard it. The studio didn't gasp. It didn't need to. The silence that followed was total. The trap hadn't just failed. It had flipped. Jeanine Pirro sat frozen, her smile gone, her fingers hovering above cue cards that no longer had a role to play. Jasmine? She didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't even blink. She had come prepared, not to argue, but to unveil. And now, the unveiling had begun. In the control booth, no one breathed. Screens blinked. Audio levels steadied. The video feed kept rolling, unfiltered, unstoppable. I don't care about truth, as long as the ratings stay up. The line was still echoing, not just in the studio, but in every corner of the building. A line spoken casually, carelessly, with no anticipation that it would ever be heard beyond a sound technician or an intern on a night shift. And now it was live. Not leaked, not rumored, live. The assistant director hovered near the playback board, hands frozen. Who loaded that file? Someone whispered. She bypassed the queue, another replied, eyes wide. Jesus. On the studio floor, Jeanine Pirro sat rigid, her eyes not meeting the camera, not meeting Jasmine. Her hand hovered above her cue cards as if one of them might contain a line that could undo what the audience had just heard. But there was no line for this. Jasmine's face remained still. She hadn't leaned in. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't even acknowledged the moment with a change in breath. Because this moment wasn't for show. It was for reckoning. Jeanine tried to recover. She cleared her throat, laced her voice with performative concern. Well, that's certainly one interpretation, she offered, wrapping the words in sugar but failing to mask the vinegar beneath. Jasmine turned her gaze, not sharp, not mocking, just steady. No, she said, that's your voice, your words, no edits, no filter, just what happens when the cameras don't know they're being watched. There was no applause, there was no shout of agreement, but there was something heavier. The silence had changed. It wasn't pause, it was proof. In the third row, a woman put down her phone. Her fingers shook slightly. She wasn't recording anymore. She was absorbing. Jeanine opened her mouth. Nothing came. She closed it. Jasmine reached into her folder again. Her movements never rushed. Deliberate, like a courtroom litigator approaching a witness stand. She pulled out a single document, official, cream-colored, with a seal that caught the studio lights. She didn't hold it to the camera. She didn't even announce it. She simply placed it on the table between them, turned it so Jeanine could read it, and said, calmly, "This is a copy of the federal criminal investigation into your attempt to plant a listening device in your ex-husband's vehicle." The words did not land, they detonated. The air in the studio changed temperature. You could feel it. Even the lights seemed to dim, not by design, but by instinct, as if even the circuitry could feel the moment shift. Jasmine kept speaking. Her tone never wavered. You, a sitting judge at the time, attempting to illegally monitor the private vehicle of your former spouse, a violation of federal privacy statutes and an abuse of judicial privilege. Jeanine's face lost color. Her eyes flickered. Her hands remained still. In the control room, someone whispered, "We can't air this. We can't air this. No one's cutting the feed," came the reply. On set, Jeanine's hands shifted toward her glass of water, hovering above it, uncertain, trembling. Jasmine leaned back slightly. She wasn't posturing. She wasn't pressing. She was presenting. "You've made a career accusing others of dishonor," she said. "But behind the desk, beneath the lights, away from the applause, this is who you are." It wasn't an insult. It wasn't venom. It was a diagnosis. In the control booth, the senior producer finally reached for her headset. Switch to Jeanine. Cut to commercial. The tech beside her shook his head. "We can't. It's running off the live system." She overrode it. "She what?" "She brought her own truth," he said, and plugged it straight into the feed. On the studio floor, Jasmine didn't move to capitalize. She didn't wave the documents. She didn't gloat. She simply reached once more into her folder, pulled a second paper, stamped, signed by the DOJ's Office of Inspector General, and laid it next to the first. Then she turned her head. Her voice dropped even lower. How many defendants, Judge, stood in front of you, terrified, unaware you were committing crimes of your own behind the scenes? Jeanine exhaled. The sound was shaky, audible. The camera caught it. Jasmine didn't press. She didn't need to. The moment was pressing itself. You used your bench not to uphold justice, but to punish. You turned your courtroom into theater. And now you want to ask me about justice? Her hand tapped the folder once. Just once. Not a slam. Not a flourish. Just punctuation. This isn't about a clip. It's not about a tweet. It's about a legacy. And the one you've built, Judge, is cracking. The camera stayed on Jeanine. For the first time, her eyes didn't find the lens. She looked down, at the documents, at her past. Jasmine folded her hands, sat back in her chair, and waited. She didn't need to say anything else. Because the truth was still speaking. And for once, no one dared cut to commercial. The studio hadn't breathed in over a minute. Not truly. Not since the second document landed on the desk. Not since the silence began pressing down like gravity itself. Jeanine didn't reach for the papers. She didn't even pretend to. Her hands stayed frozen on the desk, her fingers curled, resting like they were bracing for impact. Then, from somewhere in the audience, a chair creaked. A rustle. The stillness cracked not with noise, but with intent. A man stood up, middle-aged, plain black shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows. No badge, no sign, no outburst. Just the kind of man who worked late, paid attention, and had grown tired of staying silent. He didn't shout. He didn't chant. He simply said, clearly, "How are you still allowed to sit here?" The question wasn't a weapon. It was a verdict. Jeanine turned her head slowly, as if her body resisted acknowledging the voice that had just pierced the room. Her lips parted slightly, like she meant to answer, but there was nothing there. Not a defense. Not even denial. Just air. The man didn't sit back down. He didn't need to. His voice, measured, steady, carried further than any applause ever could. If this were anyone else, they'd be escorted out. You demand it. You've demanded it. For less than this. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't need to validate it. She let the moment speak for itself. Because truth, when finally freed, doesn't need amplification. It echoes. A woman in the front row lowered her eyes. A student near the aisle closed his notebook. No one whispered. No one shifted. They were watching something shift itself. The man's words settled like dust after collapse. Not inflammatory. Just undeniable. You taught us what accountability looks like when it's someone else in the hot seat, he continued. You branded people with scandal like it was your right. You called it justice when it was convenient. He didn't raise his tone. And now, you sit here, caught, exposed, and you still want us to believe you're the victim? That last word didn't strike like lightning. It sank like truth. Quiet, heavy. Jeanine's shoulders sloped, not slumped, but surrendered. The illusion of power unthreaded itself across her body. The man sat down slowly, like a stone returning to earth. Jasmine turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge him, not with a nod, but with presence. With stillness that said, I hear you. We all do. In the control booth, no one spoke. No one cut. No one dared. On set, the on-air sign remained red, pulsing like a heartbeat. Jeanine's voice didn't return. She didn't flip her cue cards. She didn't reach for the next topic. Because there was no next. Not after this. Jasmine stood. It was slow, deliberate, graceful. Her chair whispered as it moved back across the polished floor. She didn't raise her hands. She didn't look at the camera. She simply walked. Not away. Not out. Through. Past the desk. Past the bright lights. Past the line that divides guest from host, performer from power. She stepped down into the tech pit. A quiet space behind the scenes, invisible to viewers, but vital to control. The playback engineer looked up, stunned. Young, unsure. He glanced toward the booth, waiting for orders. There were none. No one dared speak. Jasmine didn't ask. She inserted the USB again. Play the second file, she said calmly. Full volume. No cut. It wasn't a command. It was a procedure. The screen lit up again. No graphics. No score. Just raw footage. May 3, 2021. Jeanine, off-air, holding a coffee mug, talking to a producer whose voice was off-screen. I can't stand when we bring those civil rights types on, Jeanine's voice rang out. They all say the same thing. Oppression this, trauma that. It's like, give me a break. The words hung in the air. Casual, cold, familiar. She laughed. So did someone else. Jeanine added, we keep booking them though. Ratings go up every time they yell. Doesn't matter if they're right. Just if they're loud. The room didn't flinch. It froze. No dramatic cut. No denial. Just the sound of long-held suspicion confirmed. When the clip ended, there was no applause. There was no cue to laugh, no cue to gasp. There was only understanding, and it spread like light cracking through stained glass. Jasmine stood at the edge of the tech booth. She hadn't raised her voice once. But the sound she brought couldn't be silenced. Back on stage, Jeanine's body didn't move. Her face was a portrait of distance, not vacancy, not numbness, but recognition. Recognition that the mask had been removed. And the reflection beneath wasn't one she could defend. Jasmine turned and walked back toward the stage. Her pace didn't quicken. Her expression didn't shift. She returned to her seat. She didn't collapse into it. She folded into it, poised, unshaken, a storm returning to still water. Then, slowly, she reached back into her folder. One final time, a single page. She placed it on the table between them. This time, the seal at the top read, Department of Justice, Internal Affairs Division. The title underneath was short. Unforgiving. Criminal Surveillance Allegation. Summary of Findings. She didn't read it aloud. She didn't wave it in the air. She let the page breathe in the studio lights. Then, calmly, she said, "This is your legacy." Jeanine's eyes dropped. Not out of guilt. Not yet. But out of inevitability. Because some truths, when spoken plainly, sound like thunder, no matter the volume. Jeanine didn't reach for the document. She didn't argue. She didn't even look up. The studio, once designed to center her voice, had become a space where her silence now echoed louder than anything she could say. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't twist the knife. She let the document speak, let the DOJ seal gleam beneath the studio lights like a judgment handed down not from a jury, but from time itself. She folded her hands, slow and certain, and waited. There was no host now. No queen at the desk. Just a woman unraveling under the weight of her own history. The audience remained silent, not stunned anymore, just change. Somewhere in the back, someone whispered. She didn't even raise her voice. That was what they would remember. Not the exposure, not the documents, not even the USB, but the calm, the stillness, the restraint of a woman who had come not to shout but to show. And in doing so, made an empire of pretense collapse without ever lifting her voice. In the booth, the senior producer didn't call a cut. No commercial break, no urgent reroute, just the red light of the on-air sign pulsing. Alive. And then, Jasmine spoke again. Just once. She didn't look at the audience. Not even at the camera. Just at Jeanine. "This isn't a campaign," she said. "It's justice, finally seen in full light." And then she stood. Her movements so measured, they didn't feel like motion. They felt like memory. Like a history being written one footstep at a time. She didn't wait for applause. There wasn't any. There didn't need to be. She crossed the stage, walked past the edge of the light, and disappeared into the shadow where truth often waits until someone brave enough carries it forward. Behind her, Jeanine remained still. Eyes distant, hands trembling, her cue cards limp, her voice gone, a legacy no longer in her control. The screen never cut, because some endings can't be edited. And this was one of them. What followed was not chaos. It was clarity. Online, the moment exploded. A clip, just 20 seconds long, captured Jasmine placing the USB on the table and uttering those final words. It was shared millions of times in hours. But something strange happened. It wasn't viral for drama. It was viral for truth. No caption screamed. No influencer spun it. It stood on its own. Because sometimes, truth walks into a room so calmly, so prepared, so exact, that the world doesn't cheer. It holds its breath. Within a day, hashtags emerged. Hashtag let us be heard. Hashtag this is justice. Hashtag USB moment. They weren't angry. They were reverent. Clips of Jeanine's past statements were stitched together, intercut with the moment Jasmine slid that folder across the table. Each clip didn't accuse. It clarified. And slowly, networks distanced themselves. Sponsors paused contracts. A quiet audit began inside the very walls that once amplified Jeanine's voice. She didn't return to air that weekend. Or the next. Her office door went dark. No announcement. No press release. Just absence. And absence, when it follows power, says more than a scandal ever could. Jasmine didn't tweet. Didn't post. Didn't go on a victory tour. When asked for comment by national media, she replied with one sentence. I said what needed to be said where it needed to be heard. And that sentence became a banner. Not of defiance, of guidance. Universities played the footage in ethics classes. Law schools broke it down frame by frame. Media students studied her pauses, her eye contact, the precision of her silence. A new term was born in academic circles. A Jasmine moment, defined not by confrontation, but by reclamation, by the moment when someone, without shouting, redefines the frame. The impact didn't stop in classrooms. Community centers used the footage in workshops on media literacy. Activists used it to teach young leaders how to stay centered when provoked. Broadcasters began revisiting internal policies. Not because they were afraid. Because they had seen what it looks like when the game gets played by different rules. Rules of composure. Rules of truth. Rules of no longer asking for a platform, but taking it, calmly, when the time arrives. And always, the same scene played, Jasmine standing. Jasmine walking. Jasmine never yelling. Because the myth had always been that to be heard, you had to be loud. She broke that myth with a whisper. Months passed. Jeanine faded from headlines, not in disgrace, but in irrelevance. Because some legacies don't burn out. They are simply replaced by something better, more honest, more whole. And Jasmine? She kept walking, not to take a bow, but to make space for the next voice ready to speak, not to perform, but to reveal. And in the end, when the world asked what changed that night, the answer was simple. Someone finally walked into the frame and refused to be edited out.